Hey guys, Hunter here. Welcome back to the Game Room. Today we're taking a look at the newest Fantasy Flight living card game offering, Warhammer 40k Conquest. This is a two-player card game by Eric Lang, and it's designed to play pretty quickly. Each player is going to control a warlord from one of the 40k factions, and all but two are actually included in the base game, and the other two are going to be included in later expansions. You essentially build around that one warlord with your faction cards. You can actually go out of faction and neutral, and essentially you're trying to take control of planets or kill your opponent's warlord. Let me show you the cards, the factions, the artwork, and the gameplay, and I'll give you my opinion at the end. Planets are very important in 40k Conquest. There are 10 planets included in the game, and you're going to be using 7 in any particular game with 3 removed randomly. These planets are going to be laid out in a row, which I'll show you in a moment, and they're pretty much one of the victory conditions. The other victory condition is just destroying your opponent's leader, which we'll talk about also in a moment, but these planets have some very specific things that are very important for you. The most important thing is this symbol in the top left-hand corner. This symbol is how you can win the game. You'll have a red symbol, you'll have a blue symbol, and then you'll have a green symbol. If we can find one. There we go, and a green symbol there. What you'll be doing is when these are out in a row, every round the first planet in that row is going to be fought over. Whoever wins the battle is going to get that planet, and once they've collected planets with 3 matching icons, so we collected a red icon, another red icon on this one, and then later on maybe another red icon, that player is going to win the game. So that's one of your major routes to victory. These are also going to be command struggles and battle effects. The command struggle is going to be a separate phase in which players are trying to have the most influence over that planet during that phase, and they'll be getting cards, which are this symbol, and credits or resources, which is how you pay for your cards, which is that symbol. During the battles, they'll also get battle effects, which will be special powers that are unique to each planet, and can really swing the tide of the game. They're usually pretty powerful effects, like stealing credits from your opponent, or copying the battle effect of another planet in play. So there's a lot of really interesting effects that you can get from that. So how do you vie for control of these planets? Let me set these planets up, and I'll show you the example decks and how you actually play the game. So here we have a basic setup for Warhammer 40k Conquest. In the middle here we have those same planets we just talked about. We have 5 that are revealed at the start of the game, and then 2 over here to make the full 7 that'll be revealed throughout the game. We have the starting player token, this big Space Marine insignia, and we have our 2 factions. We're going to be playing the Imperial Guard over here, and over here we have the Dark Eldar. As always, as is Fantasy Flight style, we have a dial, which we'll get to in a moment, but more importantly we each have our own warlord. And each faction in the game comes with their own warlord, and I'm assuming they'll be introducing more of these later. But warlords are how you build, not only how you build your deck, but how you start with resources. So we have Colonel Strachan, and Colonel Strachan is the Imperial Guard leader that comes with the base set, and he has a special power that each other soldier or warrior at this that you control at this planet gets +1 attack. Similarly, the Dark Eldar have an ability on their card that brings more units into play, and all the factions have special ones that go with their particular faction's playstyle. In our case, we're trying to play a bunch of soldiers that have low attacks, and you can boost that attack, so it's kind of like a weenie rush or a swarm deck. On the back side, you have a bloodied side, which doesn't have an ability. What happens is essentially throughout the game, your character is going to take damage, your warlord is going to take damage, and once they've taken their hit points, which in our case is 6, they'll be flipped over to the other side, and once they take 5 on that side, they die, and that's the end of the game as well. So in addition to collecting these planet symbols, killing off the warlord is another way to beat your opponent if you can just beat them down at a planet. Now, in addition to having hit points and having attack value, and they're essentially a unit in terms of the game, they also control your resources, like I was just saying. At the bottom here, there's a couple numbers. In this case, all of them in the starter have a 7 and a 7. But that equates to your starting hand size and your starting resources. Resources being these little symbols here with little wrenches and hammers on them. So in our case, we start with 7 resources and we start with 7 cards. So we'll go ahead and draw that on top of the deck. And like I said, the base ones all have 7 and 7 right now, but I'm assuming that that's going to be changing as more factions get out of the deck as they introduce more packs later on. So each player is going to start off with 7 cards, and you're going to be essentially playing these cards out in order. You're going to be alternating turns playing cards, so all of the phases are alternating. The first phase is the deploy phase. So we're going to be starting with first player, which is the Imperial Guard for our example here. And we can look at our hand and determine what we want to play. So there are a few different types of cards. We have army cards, which are essentially your units that you're going to be playing onto different planets. You have events, which are going to be one-time use things that are going to be special powers that might happen at certain times, like an interrupt. This is going to be happening when your opponent uses a shield, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. Reactions when something happens with an elite unit. So they'll be happening at specific times. And there's also going to be support cards, which I don't have any in this hand, but support cards are going to go back here next to your leader, and they'll essentially be additional effects that stay in play, but they're similar to events. They aren't units; they don't get assigned to planets, but they can work like that. There's also attachments, so there'll be things like weapons that can be attached to your army, or upgrades, like in this case of the Space Marines, the Iron Halo, which is a very protective piece of equipment. So, looking at our hand, what our main objective here, to control planets, we need units on them. Units are going to have these little hammer icons here, which will equal their command value, and that'll be getting us additional resources. Those things I mentioned earlier, those little icons here, the numbers, the 1 and the 1 on that, the card and resources. Whoever has the most hammers there during the command phase, the most hammers on their units, is going to get those resources. So that's an additional way to get resources. But we're also going to be trying to capture a planet. Every round, the first planet, the one with this little icon on it, is going to be up for grabs. Whoever ends up winning the battle on this planet is going to take this planet into their tableau in front of them. Essentially, they're going to be collecting the planet and getting that symbol at the top and getting the battle effect there as well. So what we're going to do here is, I have Acadian Mortar Squad, so I'm going to go ahead and play that on the first planet. So, similar to our Warlord here, they each have a power and a hit point. So the black number is, in this case, 1. It's how much damage they're going to be dealing when they do combat. And the 3 on them is how much hit points they can take, how much damage they can take back. So we pay 3 to play him on that first planet. So our opponent looks at their hand, and they can do the same thing. So they have the opportunity to play something. And they actually do have a support. So they're going to play the support, which is the Prometheum Mine. So it's a limited item, so you can only play 1 limited card per round. And essentially, it'll be getting them credits over time. So they pay 1 to play it, and then you put 4 credits on it, and you can get those credits off beginning of your turn, essentially. So that's where the support options go. They go back here next to your Warlord. This area back here is also called your headquarters. There are going to be units back here in a moment, which I'll explain in a sec. So they've played their unit out, or their card out, so we get to go back here, and it looks like we only have 1 more unit option. So we're going to go ahead and play the Elysium Assault Team, spending 2 credits. We'll play it on that first planet because we really want to get that planet. So our opponent is going to look at theirs, and they're going to play Beast Hunter Witches. So that looks pretty savage. Pay 3 credits. Now in my case, I can't play anything else, so I would have to pass. And then my opponent get another option if they want to play something else. They do have the credits for it, so they're actually going to save up because they have a few different things. Actually, no, they're going to do this. They're going to play the Suffering, which is an attachment, so I can show you what this looks like. So an attachment, usually they go on your own units, but in this case, this is Suffering, and they're trying to inflict suffering on me. So they're going to put that on my Elysian Assault Team. So this unit that's attached to gets -2 attack. So they've kind of neutered my units there. So I've passed, they pass. So now we would move into the command phase. So the command phase, again, this is where these dials are going to come into play. So what we're going to be doing, these dials go from 1 to 5, and we select where we want our Warlord to go. So say you want to try to guarantee that you're going to win this first planet, you might send them to 1. However, if you send them to another planet, it pretty much conflicts happen wherever the Warlord is or on the first planet. So a conflict is going to happen here on this first planet regardless of if we send a Warlord here or not. Other planets may not actually fight unless there's a Warlord there. So if we send a Warlord to another planet, we can get their command ability for free. So if I say, I don't think my opponent is going to go to this planet, so I could send my Warlord to planet 3, and I could get their command effect, which is that 2 credits. And, if I needed credits right now, I might say, okay, that's where I want to go, because I'm kind of outguessing my opponent. So this is kind of a bluffing mechanism to a degree, determining, if you're going to collect resources that term, if you're going to go for the first planet, so, there's a lot of things that go into that. So what we're going to do, we're going to be a little bit straightforward here, just because I want to show you combat. And we're going to go to Planet 1. So I send mine to Planet 1. We're selecting these secretly. And my opponent does the same. So what we'll do is, when you select this dial, you'll send everything that's in your headquarters. In our case right now, it's just our warlords. So we're going to send those there. And that would essentially be the end of the deployment phase. If there were other units there, say maybe a unit that had died earlier in the game, or not died, but retreated earlier in the game, had gone out there, they would also go with that warlord to that planet. They would go in a tapped phase or a exhausted phase. So when you attack, you tap sideways, kind of like in Magic or any other games, but they don't call it tapping. It's exhausting. So whatever, not a big difference. So we go into this phase. So now we go into the command phase. So we're in the command phase, but now we go into where we actually determine who gets command of each planet. So normally, if you have a warlord at a planet, you automatically win that planet. A warlord trumps all the hammers, essentially. So even if my opponent had more hammer symbols, my warlord trumps that. In this case, though, he has a warlord present there as well, so we would look at our hammer symbols. So in my case, I have 2, and in their case, they have 2 as well. So we actually tied. No one will get these 2 cards, which is the command reward. These numbers in the corner are always going to be the reward for that command phase. So normally, if I had been ahead in hammers on that case, I would have drawn 2 cards. Or if my opponent had been ahead, they would have drawn 2 cards. So that's the command phase. It's kind of like the resource gathering phase, essentially. Now, then you move into the combat phase, and this is where things get a little trickier, but it's still not too complex. Starting with whoever's first player, again, we're still first player. Actually, it started with whoever has initiative. That's inaccurate. I'm sorry. Initiative in combat is actually determined by whoever has the warlord there. So in our case, we have our warlord, they have their warlord, so it goes to me because I have the initiative token that turn. But if it was just my opponent, even if I had the initiative token, if my opponent had a warlord here and I didn't, they would actually go first in combat. So that's something to keep in mind. So we would go into combat. Now, before combat really starts, there is a segment called ranged combat, which is kind of like a first strike. Whoever has ranged can attack before other players attack. So there's like a second phase before the attack phase where snipers and stuff like that can get off their attack. So we actually have a Cadian mortar crew, and they have the ranged keyword. So they're going to be able to attack first. We'll look over here, and we don't have any ranged on here, unfortunately. So I actually failed to do the Dark Eldar's ability, which brings one of these Chimera tokens into play whenever they're assigned to a planet. These little cards are actually just tokens. There are a few for a few different factions from different effects. They don't actually get shuffled into the deck or anything. So let me actually focus on just this planet. I'm going to show you the combat up close to give you a better idea of how this works. So here's the combat broken down a little bit closer. So we have all of our units here. We have both our warlords, and we each have 2 credits at our disposal, which may come into effect if we have events in our hand that can be played during combat. I also still have my first player token, so we have warlords here. So since we both have warlords, I have the first player token, so I get to go first. Now, before the regular combat starts, we have the ranged combat phase, which there isn't a lot that happens in that other than just anything with ranged can activate. So in our case, we do have the Cadian mortar crew has ranged. They have a reaction as well, but that's not going to come into play just yet. So they have 1 attack, so they're going to tap or exhaust, and they're going to do 1 damage to something. So they have 1 damage to give out, and they're going to go ahead and give it to the Chimera. Because, hey, the Chimera only has 1 hit point, so they take that 1 damage, and they're gone. So right before the battle even starts, the Imperial Guard have gotten rid of a unit. So we're done with the ranged phase, nothing else has ranged, and we go into the regular combat phase. So I still go first since this is a separate phase, and we have not a lot at our disposal, to be completely honest. We have an Elysium assault team, which has -2 attack, but it does get +1 attack from Straker's ability here, so they're a 1/1 essentially. They have 1 attack and 1 HP. And then Straker himself, who has Straken, who has 2 attacks, so he's going to be doing 2 damage to something. Now, warlords can also retreat if they want. So if you feel like your warlord, or if you're losing battle and your warlord might have a risk of getting hurt too much or dying, you could exhaust him to retreat back to your headquarters. In our case, I'm not as worried about it right now, so I'm going to leave him as is. And just since we have the possibility of getting hurt, we're going to use our first combat action to do 1 damage to this Beastmaster guy. So we're finished with that witch. So we've done our combat action. It goes over to our opponent. So our opponent has the opportunity to do their own combat action, which is normally just attacking. However, they could play an event that takes a combat action as well. So, like in our case, we have one here called Power from Pain. And in the case of Power from Pain, it's going to give us a Power Torture, which those are just keywords, so it's not that important. But it's a combat action, and your opponent must sacrifice an army unit if able. So they have 2 credits. They can go ahead and cast that. So they spend their 2 credits. They use their combat action to cast this event. So we have to sacrifice a unit. So I'm going to go ahead and choose our Elysium Assault team. So we drop that. It goes to our discard pile. They lose their attachment. Now a couple things happen here. First off, that was a Dark Eldar event. So the reaction here is after you play a Dark Eldar event, you can pay 1 to put a Chimera token into play at your HQ. They're out of credits, so unfortunately they can't do that. However, we have the Cadian Mortar Squad here, which is reaction. After an army unit you control with this power leaves, you control at this planet leaves play, ready this unit. So we just lost that Elysium, so we get to untap that or ready that unit. So it comes back to our turn. They've used that combat action on the event. So now we get to attack again. Even though this is ranged, it can still attack in the regular combat phase. So we're going to attack again at that. Actually, you know, we're going to go ahead and attack with our regular guy here to kill this off. So now we've killed 2 units, including the token. So at this point, it's looking a little grim for the Dark Eldar, unfortunately. We have 2 units there, 1. So in a battle of attrition, what'll happen is once all the units are tapped out and done their damage, so let's just theoretically, they attacked us and they do, let's say they attack our mortar squad and do 2, then our mortar squad attacks back and does 1. Once you do that, you check to see if anyone's won. So since we both have units available still here, no one's won that, so we would untap, ready everything, and essentially go again. So in this case, as you can see, we have 2 to their 1. Eventually we would wear them down too much. And once they get damaged all the way to their bloodied side, the first time they get damaged all the way, they have to go back to their headquarters anyway. So honestly, there's not a lot of point in playing that out and essentially staying here to get beat up by the mortar squad and my guy. So they might just say, okay, you know, I'm not winning this planet. I'd rather not risk my warlord. Let me go ahead and exhaust, send me back to the headquarters, and, you know, live to fight another day. So in that case, we would win this combat since we're the last people alive when we check for the resolution of the combat. And we would get to take this planet into our tableau, so we now have a blue planet, and we'd get their battle effect, which is search the top 3 cards of your deck for a card, add it to your hand, and place the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. So, as you can see, a pretty game-swinging effect that you get from the card, as well as 1 step closer to victory. And if we got 2 more blue icons, we would win the game. So that's really the gameplay. That's all there is to it. Once you're done with the actual combat phase and finish the combat and everything, you move into the headquarters phase, and the headquarters phase is kind of a cleanup phase. You'd already take the first planet token, or the first planet, and then you move that token along the line, reveal a new planet so that there are 5 planets available. Everybody draws 2 cards, you gain 4 credits, so even if you didn't win anything during that command phase at the beginning, you can still get credits and still get cards. And then you essentially ready everything. So these guys that were at that first planet, we collect that planet, and all these units that were there go to my headquarters. And any units that were treated on my opponent's turn go to their headquarters, or maybe if they, you know, if we were able to activate that ability from the witch that created a Chimera token, they would be in the headquarters. So then again, that's your headquarters slowly builds up, and next time we reveal this dial, you're going to be putting more units out there. So that's really the gist of it. We just collect planets, or we kill the opponent's warlord. Not super complicated. Has fairly unique deck building rules. I like the fact that you're building pods with the characters themselves. So there's always going to be a unique component to your deck in the sense that there's going to be a chunk of your deck that's built around a specific strategy with this character. But you still get to build around that whatever you'd like, essentially. So, and I like the allies. One thing I did want to point out was the starter, or the rulebook for this game, which is actually split into 2 things. It's a new thing that Fantasy Flight's doing. So you have a Learn to Play guide, and then you have a regular game rules. So the Learn to Play guide is essentially a walkthrough of how to play every round, and it's a very good walkthrough, actually. It's very straightforward. It's super easy to learn from. So you really learn the full game through this. The rules reference is more of a breakdown of timing, specific keywords, and just the more in-depth stuff, but you learn pretty much everything you need from this. This is one of the first games I'm going to say from Fantasy Flight where I read the rules and were like, this is a really good job of rules writing. I like the way that they're doing this. From what I understand, this is how Fantasy Flight's going to be doing it for a lot of games going forward. There's going to be a learn-to-play guide and then a full rule book with a lot of the breakdown. So I definitely am a huge fan of that. And on the back here, you'll have a little chart of allies. The cool thing about this is that everything in this outer ring is already in the game. So you've got, let me go through them here because I know this is what some people are really excited about. You've got Tau with Commander Shadow Sun. These guys are focused around attachments and using ranged combat, higher attack, lower defense, but Shadow Sun can give you free attachments every time he gets assigned to a planet. I love their color scheme, that orange and blue. The artwork in this game is amazing. So you also have the orcs, which are kind of bashy, as you'd expect. The orcs are fairly straightforward. They like getting +1 attack, and they actually like hurting themselves to get more attack, which is a really interesting strategy. So you have a bunch of those orcs there. They're kind of a starter faction, I'd say. They're one of the ones recommended to start with, but I actually prefer the Imperial Guard myself. They're very straightforward as well. You have Chaos, which Chaos has some random effects, but they also increase damage. This is Zeech Chaos particular, so maybe we'll see some Khorne and some Nurgle later in the game. They have Cultists that can lower the price of demons. We have old Captain Cato Sicarius, a classic for the Space Marines. The Space Marines are kind of like the money faction from what I can tell. They gain a lot of credits. His ability gets you more credits, things that lower the cost of units. They're a very efficient, straightforward faction. Another good one to learn with. And the Eldar, which he's a little weird. They're kind of a control-ish army. Probably one I have the least experience with at this point, but they kind of exhaust guys down and mess with the combat phase a little bit more. So there's a few finesse armies. There's a few straightforward ones like the Space Marines and the Imperial Guard and the Orcs. Then you got ones that take a little bit more learning, like the Dark Eldar. It's combat oriented, but it can be very finicky because it's a little bit light on defense. Tau are very much integrated. They're very synergistic. But the cool thing is this chart here, it actually shows you can have alignments. So around the outside are all the guys that are included in this base game. When you build your deck, you can use your base unit. So you'll be using your Warlord. So let's say you're using Eldar. You would use your Warlord and the 8 cards that come with them. And then you can build your deck from your faction, neutral cards, or from a faction to the left or right of you on this chart. You do have to choose one and stick with one. You can't choose both. But say you want to have an Eldar deck and you want to have some specific Dark Eldar cards in it, maybe some events or a particular unit that works well with your strategy. Or there's a Tau unit. You want some Tau attachments, maybe you want some Tau weaponry to go on your Eldar. You can do that. I like that combination. And there are also little hints here. We have, and they say it in the rulebooks, we have Tyranid and Necrons. These are going to be available in the first big expansion. Necrons are not going to be able to team up, or excuse me, Necrons are going to be able to team up with anybody. They're at the center. Tyranids can't team up with anybody. They're loners. They just care about themselves. They're a hive mind horde, so it wouldn't make any sense. But that's cool that they've included those on there so you know what's coming up. But there's a ton of stuff in the base game here by itself. So, guys, that's really it. That's how you play. That's the breakdown of deck building. Let me take you to my final opinions. So guys, that is Warhammer 40k Conquest. To be honest, at Gen Con, this wasn't on my to-buy list. It was one of those, I passed on the Warhammer Fantasy LCG. I just didn't really feel like I needed another LCG, despite buying Doomtown and an assortment of other card games there. But I did run into Team Covenant's Stephen Woolley, a really awesome guy. He talked to me for a little while, and I mentioned that I was not getting Conquest, and he said, "Ooh, that's too bad. It's awesome." And I trust those guys. If you haven't seen Team Covenant's channel, they are specialists in Fantasy Flight games, LCGs, and miniature games like X-Wing, Infinity, stuff like that. And they know their games, so I decided, you know what, I'll give it a flyer. When I went to Fantasy Flight's booth on Saturday, I decided, I saw a big stack of them, why not? I'll give it a shot. So I'm really glad I did. This is a very, very interesting concept. I say, as far as difficulty goes, the learning curve, it's nowhere near something like Netrunner or Doomtown, honestly. This was a very simple one for me to grasp, and I think the strategies of the Warlords are fairly self-explanatory. Fantasy Flight does a really good job in this in a few different aspects, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but they've kind of gotten their rules down a bit. I like their Learn to Play booklet. It was much easier to learn through that and then go to the full rules. And really, you have everything you need in that Learn to Play booklet. The full rules are mainly just to get down keywords and things like that. The Warlord strategies, once you actually read the Warlord and kind of grasp what their ability is, you get an idea of what their deck's about. Because if you're playing with just the starter, you're pretty much going to be throwing in all of that faction's cards and then the neutral cards or half the neutral cards for that faction. For that deck, essentially. It's not a, I guess, competition legal deck. However, you can definitely make those in this. I like the team-up aspect. It does take a bit from the actual 40k universe in that they've introduced a lot of allies in the actual tabletop miniatures game. So in this, you can essentially recruit your allies from the same sphere. So there's a little, I showed it in the video, but that little chart where you have the Space Marines next to the Imperial Guard. So you can recruit Imperial Guard armies, or you can recruit their other ally, but you can only recruit one or the other. So you do have to make a choice, but there's enough in here where you can make a competition legal deck. Now, as with most Fantasy Flight LCGs, the starter set has a lot of singleton copies or 2-of copies or something along those lines. So if you're wanting to get into tournaments and things like that, you're probably going to want to get 2 starters or 3. I don't know about 3, but at least 2 probably. But for me, this was actually enough. You're talking to someone who has every Netrunner expansion, 3 starters, a bunch of Star Wars LCG stuff, a bunch of Doomtown, tons of LCG stuff. And this was really enough, at least to whet my appetite. I'm definitely interested in it. I want to see how it develops competitively around my area before I really invest in it. But it's a lot of fun. Even if there was nothing more for this game, I think there's enough in this box to keep me satisfied, which is not something I can usually say about most LCG starters. The combat symbol, I love that it's on a timer. The fact that the planets kind of time out your turns. You're going to be losing 1 planet turn, so it's going to be 7 turns long. No matter how long you want to make it, that's as long as that game's going to go, or shorter. I believe that this might edge out Star Wars as far as my favorite lower complexity LCG. I think this is somewhere in between difficulty. It's probably right around the Star Wars LCG difficulty, if not a little bit easier, honestly. So if you're interested in a space-themed LCG, if you like the Warhammer 40k universe, or if you're interested in a fast LCG that has some really cool concepts, I love the secretly deploying your Warlord, the fact that battles are fought on specific planets, not all across the board. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, I definitely recommend Warhammer Conquest. This is a really surprisingly fun LCG for me. This is definitely the dark horse surprise for the con, as odd as that sounds for me. It wasn't on my radar as something that I think I would enjoy. It was on a lot of other people's radars, so might not be the most surprising thing for you guys, but for me, this is a pretty big surprise. So guys, check out Warhammer 40k Conquest. I definitely recommend it. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that review. As always, you can check out all our social media in the description below. We got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon if you'd like to support us that way. You got the subscribe button here, subscribe button down there as well. If you like this video, please give it a like. And if you want your friends to check out the channel, go ahead and share the video as well. We definitely appreciate it. As always, guys, I will see you next time in the game room.